you've been in different places and taken over rooms. How much can just a new voice and a fresh start help some young guys? And has it helped a guy like maybe Trey Poteet and some of these guys you're just now getting to know?
You know, I think anytime that you take over a group, everyone sees it as a fresh start. And so I think anytime guys get a fresh start, they look at it as a standpoint to be able to right all the wrongs, to be able to do things, and to be able to want anything to get on a level playing field as far as competition is concerned. And when you talk about guys like Trey Poteet, you come in your first year, you play, you're not going to be as good as you're going to eventually get to. And there's a huge learning curve in that first year. So I think for all of those young guys that were here last year, it was kind of that, a reset, a restart, you know, listening, but able to reflect back on what happened to them last year, knowing that they need to improve in that area and depending upon you to help them get there.
Vince, then Patrick.
I know there's a lot of skill sets to go with a corner, a quality corner especially, but how would you kind of rank some of those traits that you think lead to the best college football corners?
And I think it's different. Really, it has a lot to do with the scheme that you're playing and what you're trying to get accomplished. You know, if you are a primary man team, you've got to have guys that can do that. That's more speed, that's more agility. A lot of times they can be a little bit smaller. But when you're playing more zone schemes, you know, the bigger bodies, you know, it really depends upon the type of receivers that you're going to do. You know, I think what you probably need to do is stack your room equivalent to what you're going to face. Now, with us having a defense that includes nickels, we're going to have some of those smaller guys that can cover on the inside of the slots. And, you know, we've got several big body guys that are in the room. But I think for what we're doing schematically, ironically, the room here in Tennessee fits what Jim Knowles likes to do.
Coach, what have been your initial impressions of working with Ty as a player, as a person? How do you kind of motivate a young guy that's had some success and keep him pushing for more?
Well, you know, I got 27 years of experience, you know, of doing it. And Ty is a very humble kid. You know, he's a guy that had a lot of success, but, you know, he doesn't look at the season that he had last year with any air of arrogance whatsoever. You know, he's eager to learn, he's hungry to get better, and he wants the knowledge and wisdom that I've been able to share with him over the course of my career. He's a very, very smart football player. He's a guy that naturally been a little bit bigger. You got to iron some things out from a fundamental technique standpoint. You talk about when a guy comes in as a true freshman, he doesn't get a lot of that training. You know, it takes corners a while to get as good as they're going to become. And I think he's relishing the fact that, you know, me harping on the details. I'm kind of old school in how I go about things. The drills that we're doing are showing up in practice, and I think he and the rest of the room is embracing that.
Austin.
Speaking of Ty, he's kind of a quiet kid. Who is the vocal leader in your group? Like, do you have to have one? Do you have to have a guy who's kind of that Drew Brees, bring them all in and give the kind of pep talk type player in your room?
You know, I don't really have a guy, you know, in the room. And what you have to do as a coach and what you have to do as a leader is you have to almost force them to step out of their comfort zone in that regard. And that's what we've been working on. I'm a guy that believes that a lot of the growth at any position comes in the meeting room. And we've had a lot of time to spend in the meeting room. And we do a lot of exercises in our meeting room that not a lot of other people in college football do. And that's getting comfortable with one another. That's being honest with one another. That's pointing out the strengths and weaknesses of each other. I have them to tell one another how they can get better, because the only way that you're going to be as good as you can be is to unify. And in order to be unified, you got to care about each other. And in order to care about each other, you got to know each other. My first week here, my very first meeting, those kids in the room didn't even have each other's phone numbers. So we have a long way to go in that regard. So it's hard to be a vocal leader if you don't even know the guys that you're talking to. But every meeting that we've had, step by step, we've worked toward that. And I think all of them are talking enough now. You know, some guys are going to lead by example. And if they're not vocal guys, you teach them that's what they have to do. So everything that they do has to be something that everybody else is looking at and saying, that's the way that you do it. But Ty is a little bit quiet, but he does do a really good job of picking the young guys up, and he is embracing that role.
Brent, then Vince.
Obviously, across the board in the secondary, a lot of portal, additions. What did you expect out of that group of corners and nickels that came in out of the portal? Did you know much about them? What have you seen out of the Mosses and Lee and some of those guys that came in that had experience elsewhere?
You know, I didn't know much about any of them at all. So, you know, it was kind of day one, page one, just in the walkthroughs, observing them. And once we were able to start practice, you know, you can see a lot of the traits. What you have to do in our position is go back and look at film on guys and kind of get an idea of what to expect. But you don't want to develop an opinion as a coach on a guy before you actually coach him. Because what you see on tape generally is a highlight film, or you don't know the situation, or you don't know if a guy's playing unmotivated, because there's just so many uncontrollable factors. Guys transfer for a reason. And a lot of times when guys are unhappy, a lot of times when guys think that their coaches are going to get fired, they're not playing the way that they're going to play. But again, it's like the first question that you asked. I think all of those guys in that room saw a clean slate. You know, so I've been very, very pleased with where we are, because my mission coming in here was not to develop one or two players, it was to develop a unit. Because what I found out in my career, you got to have multiple guys in your room that can play if you expect to win championships, because in order to win a championship at the college level, you got to play a lot of games. You got to play a lot of snaps. So if I've only got two guys in my room that can help us win ball games, at some point they're going to taper off. So you've got to have other guys that throughout the course of the season can get quality reps so that everybody gets to the finish line. And I think collectively we've got 5 guys in that room. You know, the 3 guys that were here last year, the 2 guys that transferred are in a really, really good competition right now to see who's going to rise to the top. But more than anything, trying to get 5 guys that no matter who we play, we give ourselves a chance to win.
I want to ask about one of those guys specifically. What are you getting in Caden Lee coming over from Auburn?
You know, Caden's played a lot of snaps in this league, had some individual success, but hadn't had a lot of team success. And those things affect a lot of guys. I think he's one of those guys that, you know, really wanted a fresh start, really wanted an opportunity to prove himself, and he works at it. You know, you can tell by watching him in practice, in the meeting room, that he's got a level of maturity to him. You know, what we're doing is a little bit different, you know, so a lot of times you don't feel as free, so he's learning. But he's been really impressive as far as helping to bring the young guys along. And the one thing I would say about him probably that stands out more than anything is an excellent teammate. And that's what you want when you bring a guy into your room, into your program, into your locker room. You know, a lot of times you don't know these guys, and you only have a small amount of time to recruit them in the portal. So it's a lot of times the roll of the dice and who you're bringing in. And what you want to see when you got a guy that's been in another program, especially a program that's played against you and competed against you, you want to make sure that guy's the right type of person. And I think that's the one thing that I can look at him and say, you know, that kid's a captain, that kid's a leader, that kid is good for my room, and that kid's good for our program.
Last 2, Sam and Patrick.
Coach, Corner's a position where, you know, your guy can, like you said, have a great tape, you know, a lot of focus on himself, but, you know, one big play is given up and all of a sudden fans are blaming that group. How do you kind of coach your guys as far as, hey, you know, you want to cover your guy, you want to have your position, but you also got to make the right team play, the good play that's, you know, not just elite coverage, but, you know, the right play for the team as a whole?
Yeah, cornerback's one of those positions where you really got to have a level of confidence that nobody else can relate to. Not many people are criticizing you are going to understand how hard it is to do what you do. Not many people are criticizing you has ever done what you're doing. And what happens with you is seen by everybody. And it's going to be criticized, scrutinized, talked about by everybody. And you just got to know that. So part of my job as their coach is to coach them on those aspects of things as well. The mental toughness piece and the confidence piece is just as important as any other basic fundamental. And that's what I was relating to when I talk about the different exercises that we have. Because what they also have to understand is you can't harp on anything that happened in the past. You know, whether it was a series ago, whether it was a play ago, or whether it was in the previous quarter, you've got to be able to move on. And a lot of people can't do that. People will still be talking about it, but you've got to go. And on the flip side of it, the offense is trained that when they see you, where you're frustrated, where you're worried, or if you're complaining, if you're trying to explain yourself, they're going to come back at you. You know, so you just got to have those guys prepared for that at all times. And whether you make a good play or whether you make a bad play, you got to move on to the next play. And it can't be something that's discussed. It can't be something that's talked about. You got to improve it and you got to keep moving on. And that's just the mindset and the mentality that every single young man in that room has to have. And those things have to be practiced, because I'd be lying to you if I told you that's natural for everybody that plays the position. But a big part of my job and a big part of the guys in the room that have played is to make sure that everybody in that room understands you can't worry about how you look in the eyes of other people when you play cornerback. You just got to be able to make the next play for your team.
Coach, you obviously worked with Jim Knowles for a long time at Duke. That was several years ago, though. So how have you sort of relearned the defense, get back into the scheme, and how all pieces fit together? How's that process going for you this spring?
It's like riding a bike, you know. Football's football. And when you coach football for as long as I have, when you played football, it may be called something different, it may be termed something different, but it's still cover three. It's still man. It's still quarters. It's still quarter, half. That part of it's not going to change. And Coach Knowles and I were together for so long, it was really easy for me to go back in the room and pick up kind of where things left off. You know, being able to finish his sentences, like all the sayings and the things that he do in the meeting, those things were developed when he and I were together at Duke. And at the end of the day, I think if you look at it, I've probably been with him longer than anybody else in that room. When you look at the combined amount of years, and he's changed a lot of things because we all have to evolve. And I think the thing he and I both have learned is I've changed some things. You know, when Coach Knowles and I were together at Duke, our recruiting pool was very, very small. And the amount of guys we were able to get was very small, especially when it came to D-linemen and some of those other bodies that are very hard to get. So we had to evolve our defense to how we could recruit. And we felt like we could recruit better DBs and smaller guys than we could the good people. So our defense evolved towards being able to play a lot of man coverage, just trying to force quarterbacks to be really good because we didn't have the pass rush. And that's how we became good. We had a lot of guys that, you know, benefited from that. And when he went to Oklahoma State, you know, he had a little bit different talent level than he had, so he evolved a little bit. A lot of the three high safeties still started to get popular. He adopted that. And naturally, when he went to Ohio State, he had really good players at every position. And so he was able to kind of do a lot of the things that he wanted to do and not have to play so much man coverage, because when you do that, there's a lot of high risk, you know, in doing that. So when you have all the pieces that fit together, you can be more schematic. And I think that's exactly what you see here.
Thank you.